So, would you like me to read the poem AI has written about you, sir?
I would love you to read it, but with a sensitivity becoming
Absolutely. Yes.
AI poems.
Yes. So, here it goes. Hey, what's up? Welcome to another episode of Wassup Conversations. In today's episode, my guest is a very distinctive composer who has worked on many movies, TV series, and video games. To mention some of his iconic works, I can name Dredd, Limitless, Tales from the Loop, and Cyberpunk 2077. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Paul Leonard-Morgan. In this fun interview, I asked some AI-generated questions and I read an AI-written poem about Paul. We talk about his childhood, musical instruments, Dredd, Cyberpunk, and his upcoming movie, Boston Strangler, which by the time this episode is out, will be aired on Hulu. Before we get in, please make sure to subscribe to Wassup Conversations if you're enjoying the podcast. As always, you can keep up with Wassup Conversations from nikufarmusic.com or my Twitter handle at @hrnikufar. Many thanks to Emad Omeri for the video version of the podcast on YouTube. Alright, let's rock. You have no idea how long I've been waiting for this moment. I've been waiting for this moment. I've been waiting for this since 2012. Why is that, do you think?
2012. What did I do? What bar was I kicked out of then? Let me think.
You raised the bar, actually, at that year.
2012. Was that Dredd? 2012?
Yes, sir. Dredd.
Look at
It's so great to have you here, finally.
Thank you for having me.
That is great. So, more than 10 years have passed from that movie, and it still kicks ass. And the score is like the half of the experience on that movie. And with it, you feel the texture of the world, the badassery and movement of the action, and kick of its drug. It's such a great experience, but we'll talk about it later, right? So, for now, I have a poem written exclusively for you, sir.
Oh man, I love this. I'm going to sit here with a coffee and listen to the poem. Right, go for it.
All right, listen up. So I was like, Paul is like one of the most established composers of the cyberpunk genre, and he has a good understanding of mixing human emotion with technology. Why not using AI to do this interview? So I asked ChatGPT AI to come up with questions for this interview. Dare I say that this could be the first interview done by AI. So anyways, it came up with something interesting. The questions are interesting, but at the end, it asked me a weird thing. It says, if I wanted to write a poem about you. And I was like, why the hell not? Sure, yeah. So, and the result is amazing. So, would you like me to read the poem AI has written about you, sir?
I would love you to read it, but with a sensitivity becoming
Absolutely. Yes.
AI poems.
Yes. So, here it goes. He's a composer of sound and vision. He creates worlds with his music and precision. He blends the classical and the modern. He's Paul Leonard-Morgan. He has scored for films and games and TV. He has won awards, acclaim aplenty. He has worked with legends and icons. He's Paul Leonard-Morgan. He can make you feel the thrill and the dread. He can make you see the limitless and the red. He can make you hear the cyberpunk and the spy. He's Paul Leonard-Morgan. He's a master of his craft and art. He's a genius of his mind and heart. He's a star of his field and profession. Guess what? He's Paul Leonard-Morgan.
I love that. Do you tell it how many times to say my name just to kind of get it into people's heads? Like, is there an ego factor that you can put? Like, does he have a big ego? We'll mention it 6 times. If he has a medium ego, you can have it 3 times.
So there you have it.
That is amazing.
A proof. Technology, AI, future has come to the conclusion that you are a genius, sir. And that is an honor to have you as my guest.
Oh, thank you. I need a copy of that poem. That is bloody amazing.
Sure, I'll send it over to you. Yeah.
we were talking about, as a bunch of us composers the other day, texting as we do at whatever time of the morning when we're all in here feeling lonely, waiting for our Pro Tools rigs to load up. It's like, anyone else up? Yeah. Hey, morning. How's it going? Cup of tea. And we were talking about exactly that. Going, I wonder with AI whether that will just be able to, we could actually just go and sleep as opposed to just be in our studios the entire time. Or maybe we could just get it to do a little bit about, maybe an hour and a half in the evenings while we're just going to have a little nap on the sofa and then come back and see how it's going. Someone else was like, isn't that why we have assistants? I was like, no, that's to make the cup of tea, not to do the composing. No, but no, I mean, genuine, brave new world, the AI stuff is wonderful. Like, as far as everyone's always been, well, it's true, isn't it? Well, as soon as a new technology comes along, everybody's always, no, it's going to take work off from the workers, or it's going to do this, or it's going to do that. And I think you can't, sorry, I know you didn't ask my opinion on this, but I've absolutely freaking loved that. Best ever start to an interview. But I genuinely think that it's always just a case of, look, as soon as a new technology comes along, everyone's like, oh my God, what's going to happen? And it takes however many years for it to actually properly be able to perfect whatever it is doing anyway. But I think if you can incorporate all the factors of new technologies, I think it's a wonderful thing. It's like everyone's always, yes, but Bach and Mozart never used electronica. That's because it didn't fucking exist. So it's like, if they were around now, what would they be doing? And genuinely, and that's why I love doing blends of orchestra, where you got orchestra and electronica and you muck around with the sounds of orchestra, because you genuinely think, I mean, who the hell knows? I didn't know Mozart or Beethoven or whatever, but it's like, you think their minds must have been plugged in. I mean, way quirkier than mine, and mine's pretty quirky. So you think, what would be going on in their minds? They would do stuff. They would take all these technologies and do stuff with it and see what it comes out at the end. And I'm intrigued to see where it all goes. But if it's half as good as the poems that it writes, mentioning my name 20 times, I'm all for it.
That's great. Yeah, you can ask a lot of stuff. I mean, in the future, do you think it's a danger for the composers or any artist?
Always. Like, there's always a danger. It's like if you're a worker in a warehouse and the robots come along, then it's taken away a hell of a lot of the work from them. And it's the case of, okay, we need you for this. And it's got to be unbelievably tough for what it is that you're doing, because suddenly you're in charge of those specific bits that Amazon or whoever else has made you go and do. Whereas there's always a danger that the world is flooded with music. So it's like, why does it need another composer? And it's like, well, I'll tell you why it needs another composer, is because composers are human, and composers have that sensibility. Fucking weird half the time, amazing the rest of the time. But I think you would have to have a really screwed up computer to have the same kind of brainwaves, brain form that we have. So it's a case of, look, just because there's another composer, you should never treat it as it's a threat. And I count AI as another composer in this sense. So it's just another way of writing music. It doesn't mean that you're better. It doesn't mean that you're worse. It's just a different viewpoint. And if someone likes AI's way of writing the soundtrack, go for it, you bastard.
I mean, I told him that I'm having an interview with you, and he or she or it, I don't know, gave me some some questions, and these are good questions for someone else's podcast, but
the AI podcast. This is it, dude. Copyright it. Go and do your thing. Right? You could be on the beach somewhere while someone else.
I'm basically replacing myself. I'm just a voice.
Yeah.
But before turning this conversation over to AI, let's talk real, man. All right, let's talk about. I mean, it never asked this question, which is a very important question. I always ask this. Let's talk about your background, your childhood, growing up with music. First time you realized you wanted to become a composer and your first gig. Tell us about the success story.
So my mum is an amazing flautist. We call them flautists in Europe. Yep. Flute players, my friends here in America call them. It's like you go to an optician, they call it an eye doctor. It's like, but what other sort of doctors here? Or the sidewalk. It's like, well, I mean, it's on the side and you walk. I guess it's a sidewalk. You go horseback riding. It's like, yeah, well, I'm not going on the front of the horse. I'm not horse front riding. That's illegal in many states. It's like, right. So my mum is an amazing flautist and pianist, and and a music teacher, and just wonderful human being. I would say that, very biased, but absolutely brilliant. So I was always surrounded by music, and Saturday mornings she would be teaching people, and we would be go and watch TV for a few hours while I'm teaching to earn some money. And you'd hear the flute, da, 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 foreign, all those kind of things. It was beautiful. And I thought, that's really nice. And my brother played trumpet, and there was me on the piano and violin and what else. And it was just, we were never forced to do it. It was always just a thing that we were surrounded by. But I'd never thought of composing. And then I was given a keyboard. It was like, the old kind of Casio, I can picture it. But it was a Yamaha. But the Casio is the ones that everybody's heard of. And it had a little fill button and I took it to one of these school talent shows before the X Factor or it came into being, or America's Got Talent, and and there's all these parents out there. As I say, it must have been 11 or 12, and then they're da da da. And the reason I can sing this is because my mum found the music a couple of years ago and said, oh my God, I wrote this on sheet music. And there's a little thing in it that says press fill button 2 here. Press fill button. So that was me. So that was about the first thing I'd ever written. And then when I went to more grown up school, 13, 14, 15, I started just doing arrangements, like writing down tunes by ear and kind of scribbling all that down and then writing it I played recorded joke. That was my very main instrument. I played the Brandenburg concertos and play it in front of thousands of people. And it was a really cool thing. So I'd write music for these recorder ensembles that I went to on summer camps and all that. And it was only when I was about 16, 17 that I started realizing, I was like, I love music. I've been obviously practicing loads and immersed in orchestras and all this kind of stuff. But I did a lot of sport as well. And 16, 17, I realized I put on this theatre production at school. I was like, yeah, this is cool. Surrounded by some dancers and surrounded by synthesizers. And we had the really early samplers and all that kind of stuff. And I just really dug it. But I didn't know what I wanted to do. I just knew that I wanted to do music. And the teacher there at the school said, look, there are all these colleges in London. There's Guildhall and there's the Academy and so on. But there's a new place called the Royal Scottish Academy of Music and Drama. It wasn't new, but it was like, it's really up and coming. So I'm from Glasgow anyway. My mum's Scottish. And so I went up there and I got loads of relations there. And I thought, I'll just go out for the weekend. And my aunt picked me up off the train and took me to the place and freaking loved it. I was like, well, this is cool. I'll just go here for 3 years and then go back down south to where my parents and family were then. And I just stayed there. I started writing film music. They had a new film music course, but the teacher buggered off to Hollywood after a term. So I was just left there going, okay, what am I going to do for 2.5 years? And there was a brilliant orchestral teacher who taught me orchestration, how you write for strings, how you what sounds good together, what traditionally sounds good. You might have a violin 1 and a horn and a flute and an oboe. That's a really good combo, whereas clarinet, that's a no-no against those kind of guys. So you taught the basics, and then you'd be in there studying Bernstein and going in the library and looking at the scores. And then I started working with some bands because Glasgow had this really cool music scene, and it just kind of overlapped. And there was a college down the road called Stowe College, and that's where Bell and Sebastian were just starting up, and they did their Tiger Milk album and all those kind of things. So as I left the Royal Scottish Academy and graduated, I needed a little bit of studio, a tiny little room just to rent out so I could do that rather than bother my neighbours. So I was in there, and then the main studio was on the other side, and they would then give me a phone and say, oh, there's this classical dude from the RSAMD, and we've got these bands in here and we need some string arrangements. Will you come and do it? That's the international sign for string arrangements. So I literally just kind of do some arrangements for the strings. They would put strings on the albums, and then you got to work with more bands and then start getting some TV and film stuff because they like the fact that I was working with bands. They're like, oh, he must be cool. I was like, they don't know me at all, but it's like, oh, he must be cool. And then the bands like the fact that you do films. So then I started getting more band work. And so I was producing bands then. And I don't know, that's kind of how I got into it. And then I just kind of fell into the film work as far as people just like that style of it, I guess. So although I'd gone to the Royal Scottish Academy to study film music, for want of a better phrase, because the teacher buggered off, there was no course per se, which is why now it's so bizarre sitting here in LA, all these frigging amazing talented people sort of like around me, and so I'm going like, what am I doing here? I haven't been found out yet,
Wow, that's great. So you had never had a dream about something else, always wanted to be a composer.
I always wanted to be a composer. And I remember, so when I was at the Royal Scottish Academy of Music and Drama, it's now called the Conservatoire. Let's call it the Conservatoire because that sounds a lot posher. So when I was at the Conservatoire, I heard the Mission soundtrack for the first time. And Gabrielle's oboe, I don't know if it's Gabriel or Gabrielle, but either way, it was just the most haunting piece of music I'd ever heard. And I was like, right, you could also do that as a job. God, I'd never even thought of that. You get to write beautiful music, but you also get to tie it to picture. And I was like, wow, that could actually be really cool. But, it's like, I think a lot of people when they start out, me included, go, oh, I want to write film music. That sounds good. Sounds fun. You've got actually no bloody idea what it is. And in the end, it's like, what is film music? It's just music which happens to be attached to film. So the wonderful thing about film music now is that anything goes. You can have a band do it. You can have a DJ do it. You can have an electronic artist do it. You can have a classical artist do it. You have everyone combining, collaborating together to do it. It's just such exciting times as far as the style of music that you can do. Is it a soundscape? Is it thematic? Is it a solo cello? Is it a solo cello that's crunched up with distortion? Is it a bunch of all these things? It's really fun because you can experiment now and really push out the boundaries. And if it's too much, well, it hasn't taken you that long to come up with an initial sound to play to a producer and director to go, look, this is kind of what's going on in my mind. And they'll either go, you're bloody insane, we love it. Or it's like, it's a little bit weird. It's like, okay, well, no problem. I'll just take that plug-in off. What do you think now? Oh, that was a solo violin. It's like, yeah, it's just a solo violin, which I've crunched up with loads of effects,
Yeah. Sometimes I'm a composer too. Sometimes people ask, I would say that I'm a musical storyteller. Because basically film music or video game music is just storytelling with sounds. Yeah. So
completely. And it's how you tell the story, isn't it? It's like you work with a director. A director comes to you and says, look, I love your style, would love you to work on my film. So, great. So he says, right, what's it about? Here, I'll send you the script. And I've said before, I'm not very good at reading scripts. I can't imagine one person's blue is another person's, is it dark blue? Is it light blue? You can be writers are so incredibly talented and they're so descriptive. I'd rather wait until I see it up on screen. But if you watch a film too many times when you're writing the music to it, you just become immune to the pictures that you're looking at. So you have a look at it a couple of times. And then for me, I just switch it off and start writing some themes and writing some suites and stuff. And the storytelling aspect of it comes then when you're like, well, you're chatting away to the director and said, well, what is it that you're trying to achieve? Describe this character to me. And as they describe it, then is she dark? Is she happy? Does she have an internal sadness? All of those things, those sensibilities, you then as a composer have then got to go and translate that into music. And when you get that right combination of the sound, which is always the hardest thing to do, to create that sound at the beginning, because once you've created the sound, well, I think of it like a band, what sort of band is it? Is it a punk band? Is it a rock band? Is it a dance band? As soon as you've got the sound, then writing the soundtrack's easy because I write really strong melodies. I know what I'm doing with that. But it's about creating that sound to begin with. And then once you've got the band, off you go and write some songs. Go and write the instrumentals, go and write that. That is the storytelling part. And that's, for me, the fun part, because it's trying to come up with the storytelling sensibilities of yourself, combining that with the directors.
Yes, that's finding the heart of it. I mean, I mentioned Dredd. Dredd, when you watch it, you can feel every sound belongs to the wall, to these characters, to the bullets. Everything is just matched together perfectly. And you can say how much I love that movie. So let's talk about
it's a great movie. I loved it.
How did that project happen? How did you get involved? And what was the process of making that sound so dope?
So I just scored a film called Limitless. It was a Bradley Cooper film.
Fantastic movie and a great soundtrack.
But again, and that's the thing, isn't it? You watch a movie and you're a composer. I don't know if you do film music. Do you do film music?
Video games. Yep.
Video games, great. So same kind of thing. The only difference with video games is that you don't really have visuals. You've got some pixels going along a screen going, oh, this is all going to be fleshed out soon. You're like, I think I can get the vibe for it. Hang on a minute. But again, I just like immersing myself in that world. So Limitless, I remember watching it. I was in Glasgow at the time, and there's Bradley Cooper and Robert De Niro looking down at you from your big screen, going like, yeah, it's an amazing cast and Abby Cornish and stuff, but it was just a great film. And I knew straight off, here's a guy that's tripping. He's on this drug, but the drug makes him super clear straight away. And then as soon as it wears off, it's like, raw. So I needed a short motif that would come in straight off. As, you haven't got time for a 16-bar theme. You've got a super short theme that comes in his head. So now he's on NZT and he's super kind of psyched and he's super clear. He has clarity. So there's this do kind of thing that comes in every single time. It's like a little dog's bell, Pavlov's bell, where it's like, ding, oh, he's now on drugs. So I've done that film. And then I met Andrew McDonald and Alon, and they were the producers in their office in London. I happened to be around, popped in to go and say hi. And they said, well, next we're working on this film. I was like, what's it called? Can't tell you. And then they said Dredd. I was like, oh my God, I used to love the Dredd comics, like 2000 AD. I grew up on them. That and a comic called Roy of the Rovers, which will mean nothing to you. It was a soccer comic. So I was like, oh God, yeah, love it. And then they got back in touch a couple of months later and said, well, look, yeah, we're looking for someone. And I met Alex Garland, the writer, and it was just absolutely great from a point of view of then let's experiment. And the difference with that was that the film went on for about, so I'm looking up here just because I'm trying to remember, the film went on for about a year. So I come off the back of Limitless, which took about a month to score. I was like, oh, wow. Yeah, this is taking a long time. And it's like, but it was great because then you get really creative. And the first score that I did, it was quite bandy. It was quite rocky kind of thing. But and we didn't want a glossy Hollywood soundtrack. It wasn't a big bombastic. It was a big film, but you didn't want the kind of glossiness to it. You really wanted the soul to it. And so I got to the end. I was like, it's fine, but I just like to try this thing. And I started putting on a kind of 4 on the floor, kind of underneath one of the cues. Got out one of my synths and was like, it was like this buzzy sort of bass underneath it. And they're like, oh, this is great. I was like, well, look, just give me a week. Because again, doesn't take long once you got your color. It's finding the color. So it's like, give me a week. I'll go and score 3 reels for you, which is like 50, 60 minutes. And I went and did it, and they all freaking loved it. We're like, oh my God, this is like great. And Alex Garland, genius, is like, look, right, take away that hi-hat. I mean, he, again, knew every single frame. He could hear every single sound. So when you're saying every sound for everything, that's all Alex as well, from a point of view of, right, there's too much hi-hats, but the sub-bass, and they're going through the drugs, and there's the bad judges.
That bad judges moment when they enter the scene and that music kicks, that's like a party, man. Every time I watch that, it's like, yes.
and that's the equivalent, isn't it? It's like, it's this little motif.
Yeah.
And then the drums come out.
Those drums.
But it's a very weird soundtrack. And this is the thing I love. So many people love it and it's great. And so many gamers love it, which is really cool. And so many coders love it. And coders get in touch and say, man, I remember going up on Dawn of War. So I went up to Relic to go and see the team up there. They're based in Vancouver. And I met them and the coders come up and was like, oh, is it Mr. Leonard-Morgan? I was like, well, Paul, but yeah, it's fine. And they're like, look, just to say, we've coded so much, not just this game. He said, we just love listening to it. And I had this wonderful conversation over a pint with them saying, well, what is it? Because for me, if I was to listen to music, I would want it to take me on a journey somewhere, however that journey is. But the Dredd soundtrack is very disjointed, and there's a lot of really weird sounds that suddenly jump out, kind of thing. And they said, yeah, but that's the thing. We never settle. So you never settle in a rhythm and you never settle in a groove. So it doesn't really distract us. It's more just this weird shit going on in the background while we're coding. It keeps our brain kind of ticking. I was like, oh, that's really interesting. But yeah, and then, Mama's Requiem, all those kind of things. It was a really fun thing to do because creatively, I'm in my best place when I don't know what I'm doing. And I mean that from a point of view of, look, I know how to use all this gear, right? I produce bands. I know how to use all my synths. I know how to then use all my computers from an inverted commas classical film scoring point of view. And I'm totally at home writing for 100-piece orchestras because that was my background. I wrote my clarinet concertos and stuff like that. But it's very easy to get in a comfort zone where you just go, oh yeah, well, I know my last score was that. You go and play that, or you go and play that because I know exactly the patch that I've got up there that I've created on my Jupiter X over there. You can't see it because they're on my keyboards over here. Wow. So it's like, right. So I know what I'm doing with that. but it's very easy to then become lazy because you haven't got enough time. So it's like, fine, I'll just go and use that because I know it's a bloody great sound. Whereas the challenge becomes creating new stuff. And that's why working with wonderful directors really pushes you in a direction that you wouldn't necessarily have thought of going otherwise. And that's why, without directing it too much onto Boston Strangler, Matt Ruskin with this film absolutely blew me away because I'd never met him before. And he got in touch about the film and we were chatting away about it. But it was only then when we're shaping stuff, and you can get very precious about your art and go, well, this is my tune. That is the tune that you want. But when you have someone going, well, it's a great tune, but why don't we try twisting it? Why don't we try that? There's two ways to be a composer. One is either you can cross your arms and go, bugger you, I'm the artist here, or you actually want to collaborate. And for me, going back to it, that's what film music's about. So suddenly he's going, right, let's try this, let's try this, let's try this. And by the end of the process, in exactly the same way with Dredd, by the end of the process, you're looking back going, I got no idea how I've achieved that because you slept and you've gone down different paths and you've mucked around with sounds and you asked me to recreate some of these sounds now. There is no frigging way I could do it because I can't remember the process because you just get into it, don't you? You know what it's like. So, but that's where the buzz is. And say those collaborations, it's really fun.
Yeah. So blink twice if you know that Dredd 2 is happening.
That's not me blinking, by the way. That's just me shutting my eyes.
Oh, it's definitely happening then. For the guys who's listening to this, he blinked twice. Yay, blink.
I mean, there's always that talk, isn't there, of the TV show that they're trying to do. And I think that the comic books would be amazing for that because self-contained pieces, which is what the comic books are. They've got the overriding story arc and you have the overriding characters and the individual characters, but you could do that so cool as imagine that on a Netflix series. Everyone's half an hour. I think that'd be the perfect form for it. And you've got endless supply of materials from 2000 AD. Anyway, don't get me onto that. It's way too early.
Well, I know people in the cult of Dredd. So this question is like, sir, have you ever seen Dredd while being high?
No, I'm very boring. I've never been high. I can't do it. Like all my mates in Glasgow, when we were working on bands and stuff like that, I was always the one that had to be getting up producing bands at like 8 a.m. and the bands would come floating into the studio at about 2 p.m. because they've all been out getting shit-faced the night before. So I'm going off having some pints with them in the pub and everything else. And I was like, really need to get back to work now because, I've got to make your tracks sound good. So, great. See you tomorrow. And then they come in 2 in the afternoon. Hey, God, we did a great job yesterday, didn't you? I was like, I mean, you did. I've also done quite a lot of work on it since then. I think, I've got such a kind of, I don't know, I have a lot of energy. And they're all going like, man, you should never take anything. Because I said, if you took something, it would probably have the opposite effect. You would just crash them. You can't get above your energy levels right now. So no is the answer to that.
All right. Let's talk about another similar project, which is a video game, Cyberpunk 2077. I'm a huge fan of that game too. I have finished it twice already, and it's the best Cyberpunk subgenre game out there. How did you get involved in that project?
The wonderful minds of Marcin, who obviously brilliant composer of The Witcher, etc. He gave me a shout. I never met him before, and the team just said, look, we like a lot of your stuff. Love to have a chat about it. We got this project. We don't know when it's happening. Is it 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years? And I just, I got on really well with them. And then Marcin came over to LA and he had another guy with him who I'd never met before, didn't know he was going to be there. And it turns out it was the brilliant PT. And he's this huge guy, devastatingly handsome. I was like, bastard, what are you doing here? But didn't know anything about him. And then it was fascinating during Cyberpunk because you got the three of us with pretty different styles. And it's a long process and you're in different countries and all this kind of stuff. But PT and Marcin in Warsaw and me over here. And then they came over, we recorded some electric cello, and that was the first time I'd really sort of got to hang properly with them. blown away by the stuff that they were doing. And this was just their initial themes. I was like, God, that's great. You could take that and start adding some of this kind of stuff underneath it. And oh God, that might be quite cool. And again, it's the collaboration. And I'd never collaborated with anyone before.
Wow.
Year. And that year I collaborated with Philip Glass on Tales from the Loop. And I collaborated with Marcin and PT on Cyberpunk. All completely different soundtracks, and really took my head away. You know, there's one that's on, there's Philip with the orchestra and piano, and it's very traditional. And I'm kind of going, oh my God, I'm working with Philip. And then there's the other one going, oh my God, I'm working with Marcin and PT. And listening to PT's beats cut through, listening to Marcin's themes, you know, all of those kind of things. It was just great. We'd be sending stuff to each other the whole time. Go, what do you think of this? What do you think of this? We had a lot of very similar gear. So that was the idea, was that although we would each take different zones in the game and different parts of Night City, it would still tie in, so it wouldn't just sound like, oh, well, there's Blur Composer, there's Blur Composer. Yeah. The whole thing, whether it's a film or a game, whatever, isn't it? You want to have some sort of continuity to it. So when you're playing the game, your brain isn't taken off to a different place because you suddenly hear a different melody or sound that's coming out of it. And I think that's what Marcin did so brilliantly when he was implementing it all, was just taking all those elements and putting it in there and going, yeah, that's great. So yeah, blast to work on that.
Yeah. I think they were a huge fan of Dredd too, because the entire game is very much influenced by that movie. Did they approach it because of that?
Well, I think the look of it, when they sent me what they call the Cyberpunk Bible, you know, lots of images of what the game looks like, etc. And again, I just like immersing myself when I was working on the Minions. Then I'm surrounded by Minions here in the studio and these Minions short films. It's like a really fun place to be. Work on the Boston Strangler. There's a lot of knives.
Wow.
We'll get there. I don't know how I feel about writing for this. But yeah, they'd sent me that. And at that stage, there was no animations done. It was just to give me an idea of the feel of the game. And I mean, the graphics, guys, it just blows me away every time. You know how people do the screen grabs in Cyberpunk, and they upload their photos, and people say, I look at it half the time. It really is, isn't it? Like, I don't understand how that can be a game. Whether it's a film or a game or anything, when you see something that realistic and you're looking at it going, hell, this is amazing. So yeah, to then get to write music for characters like that, and again, you know, I'm not just talking about Cyberpunk, but stuff in general. That is the joy of being a composer when you're working with media, is you're getting to attach yourself to these wonderful things that you can take people on a journey. And I remember Austin Wintry, this wonderful games composer, he said to me, again, hashtag I don't know what I'm doing. So I like speaking to people who just kind of say, well, okay, this is how we do it in games. This is how we do it in films. This is how we do it. You know, it's just a case of asking people, right, you know, if it was you, because you're really bloody good at this, what would you do from a production point of view? So not to do with how the tunes are or anything, but just tell me in essence about games, tell me in essence about films, tell me about theatre, yeah, whatever it is that you're writing for. And Austin was just saying that there was a game that he had done 10 years ago, I think it was. And he said people were just so moved that they would just write to him and say, I reached the end of this game. I was in tears. I was on a downer for a couple of days afterwards because I've reached the end of this game. In the same way that, you know, people would walk out of Avatar. Remember that? And they would walk the stories of people out because it was just too sad, or they were on too much of a downer after Avatar had finished. And anything that can have that emotional impact on people, that's just brilliant, isn't it? Because that's what it's about. Art should be about affecting people for good or bad, making people have a reaction. And if you can make people feel something with your music, it's a win.
Yeah, that's a great feeling. Yeah, I can relate. Yeah. So this month, you talked about Boston Strangler, and it's going to air on Hulu, which I'm very excited about. It's a great story. Greatest story, very dark story. And you're the composer of that movie. Yay! So can you talk about it, and what kind of sound are we going to get from this exciting and, again, very depressing, dark movie? Haven't seen it,
but it's not a depressing, dark movie. That is the thing. So when you're chatting, I mean, yes, it's dark, definitely not depressing. It's a thriller, but it's also not a thriller. It's a thriller. It's based on true story of these murders that took place in Boston in the 60s. And you've got Keira Knightley, you've got Carrie Coon, And you have them basically as two journalists in the 60s that were trying to take on this crime. What had happened to try and solve it? But you think about in the 60s how women were in the kitchen. You may not be out of the kitchen. This is not your place. Certainly not to be a reporter. You be a journalist. And then you have Keira Knightley, who just blows it out of the park. She's amazing. And she's there as this journalist, and Loretta. And she's in there. And they say, okay, well, here's your job. You can review kitchen utensils or whatever. She's like, screw this. I want to take on this. And of course, completely male-dominated place. And for me, that was the essence of the film. It wasn't about the darkness of the Strangler. It was about women taking on society, women taking on norms, women journalists, about can-do, about just going off and following your dreams, about doing it. So it was much more about Loretta solving the case, pushing herself outside her comfort zone to find out if she could solve these crimes. So you've got the darkness of the Strangler, sure, and obviously that's the thriller point. But for me, the interesting part of that story, and it's so relevant now, today is International Women's Day, and it's so relevant from a point of view of there are still so many barriers against women getting into jobs, women being successful, what is successful, women being able to do what they want to do, breaking down that glass barrier and that glass ceiling. And in the office where Loretta is, the newsroom, is all just men smoking, men go, oh, do you know what, get back to the kitchen. And she's married and she has kids, but she really wants to do this. So it's about the sacrifice. It's about the juggling act of having a family, but also pursuing the dream until she becomes so focused on these murders, it almost becomes obsessive. She has to solve these things. So the sound of her is quartet, piano, inverted commas, classical. The sound of the Strangler is completely fucked up. So it's like this massive orchestra that we had, mucking around with the sounds for it, adding on some electronica. Bizarrely enough, actually, one of the instruments, I call everything instruments, but one of the pieces of gear that I used in Cyberpunk, the plasma rack, which Marcin introduced me to, it's wonderful because then you start plugging all this stuff into it. It puts 8,000 volts of electricity through any sound that you've got. So it's like me doing the wiring in my house. It's much cheaper just to do my own wiring. But so it took an orchestra, took a load of basses, kind of loads of weird sounds, got them during the sessions, and then took those sounds, put it through here, through the plasma rack, and that becomes the sound of the Strangler. And that was then combined with the sound of Tina Guo playing electric cello at United Studios. We had her playing a whole load of really weird electric sounds as well. And it's like being in a toy box, isn't it? You have all these little sounds, and then it's like, yeah, but you've got to blend them somehow in the same way that I spoke about Dredd, with you've got the motif do 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 do, and then you've got this wow 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 bass, and then you've got the four on the floor do do do. Well, it's doing that but in a completely different way with Strangler. You have these melodies do 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 do, me on the piano, the quartet around me. That's the Loretta theme. But as Loretta then reaches the Strangler, and she's coming into contact with the Strangler and so on, that do-do-do-do-do-do-do then gets played on 10 double basses. Do-do-do-do-do-do, gives you that real kind of grinding underneath it. Do-do-do-do-do-do. And then you put the do-do-do-do-do-do through that machine, and suddenly it's in your face kind of thing. So it's using all of those sounds. So it starts off relatively, inverted commas, happy. It's about Loretta and the journalist and so on. And then as the film goes on, the thriller aspect really, really takes over. And there's definitely that touch of humanity with her, and the touch of you're really feeling and empathizing with Loretta, but you're really on the edge of your seats. Matt Ruskin did an amazing job with it.
I'm so excited, man. You sold it pretty well. I can't wait. Next week, I guess.
It's not, honestly, it's not selling it. You get to work on these wonderful projects. And I think for me, the sign of a good movie is if you've worked on it for 6 months and at the end of it, you still really want to go and see it. So I want to see it on Hulu. I pay my subscription. I'm gonna sit down and watch it.
That's a great sign. So as you were talking, let's talk about your toys. The things that you use to make music. Tell me about your favorite analog and soft synths.
My favorite analog synth is actually the hybrid analog synth, which is this bad boy. It's the Jupiter X.
Oh, yeah.
I go through phases, but this guy down here, which is the Roland, What's cool about it is I used to have all of these original synths. Showing my age now, but so like early 90s, I had the original Rolands and I sold them for about 50 quid, which is what, that's probably $50 now, but about $70. Because you're a student and you need money and whatever else. And I'm just like, no, they're now going for $3,000, $4,000, you idiot. And now I'm having to buy them all back. You know,
I know.
There's a website called Reverb, which is just like gear porn. You just look at it and go, right, I have one of those today. I'll have one of those today. But the wonderful thing about that is that it's got very traditional sounds for your viewers, you know, like Stranger Things or whatever. You know, it's got your very kind of 80s sounds, but it's great because you can really dig in and you can really muck around with those sounds. So it's the equivalent of hands-on of what you would do with your soft synths if you're working on soundtracks, because you haven't got enough time to really muck around with all these kind of synths. So at the moment, you know, ask me, well, not tomorrow, next week, that would probably be a different answer. But at the moment, because the matriarch, the Moog above it, I really got into on this soundtrack a few months ago. But it's really deep and really detailed, and you record it as audio because it's very hard to get the same sound and so on, because that's the whole idea of those things. But the Jupiter X just sounds great out of the box at the moment. So then getting in there and mucking around with the sounds, it's really edgy.
How about soft synth?
Soft synths at the moment, I would still say it's the Arturia stuff.
This is basically emulating analog.
Right. And that's the irony of it, isn't it? It's like it's emulating analog, but we'll destroy your computer with all of the processing power at the same time. So, thanks for that. That's great. I'll just go back to my Moog instead of using that. But again, the really good thing about soundtracks, I'm talking soundtrack specific at the moment. There's a band that I'm working with at the moment, and we started using a bit of Arturia on it. And that's great because you got time to get into it. But these things, you don't have enough time on TV series. After you got that initial episode out of the way, you don't have enough time to experiment that much. So if I was to keep going back to any sounds that I make, I'm giving you my guided tour of the studio, by going, this bit. But it's like, you don't have enough time to go back to creating the sounds and experimenting with it. So if I change the sound on a soft synth, I load up the program, and the next piece of music that I've got, that it's exactly the same sound that's up there. I come back to the matriarch tomorrow, and the Moog's got a completely different sound because the clock on it's going whoop, 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 whoop. I was like, oh, for God's sake, right? So that's why you use soft synths on soundtracks for TV specifically, because you just haven't got enough time to keep on going and experimenting and trying to recreate the sound that you had, or you've gone on to a different, work on multiple projects. So you go on to a different project, and then suddenly, oh shit, they've given me a note and they just want me to replay it, but without that. It's like, oh, I can't do
that. Yeah. So now let's hand it over to AI. Okay. So these are not very exciting questions, and you can skip it. I thought you were just going to take my tune and go and plug it into the AI, and it's going to actually be really bloody good. I'm going to change the
Come on, AI, give me your
change
words.
your
Give
answers
me your
by AI, visually and voice. So let me read the chat that I had with it and see if we can find a good question here. So I asked it that I'm interviewing Paul Leonard-Morgan. What cool questions do you have for me? And this is I'm reading this. So that sounds like a great opportunity. Paul Leonard-Morgan is a Scottish composer who has won Scottish BAFTA and been nominated for an Emmy and Ivor Novello Award. He has scored for films such as Limitless, Dredd, and MI5, as well as video games such as Cyberpunk 2077. Correct, sir.
I feel AI is plagiarizing from someone's website, but I don't know who's. But yeah, go on. What's this? Wikipedia or something? Yeah, go on.
Yeah. So it says some cool questions you could ask him are: how do you balance between using orchestral and electronic elements in your compositions? One of the most cliche questions.
Well, Mr. AI, the way that I find balance, sorry, Mrs. AI, whoever you are, AI,
be careful.
The way that I find balance is by taking orchestra and putting it through an AI machine and seeing what comes out at the other end.
I should feed it the answers. So, what are some of the challenges and rewards of working on different media platforms such as films, and TV, and video games? Basically asking, what are the challenges of your life?
Well, the challenges of working across multi-platforms are that you don't have time to take the kids to school. So you suddenly realize that you're running around late because, oh no, I've got to do that. No, I've got to do that. No, I've got to do that. Yeah, but I need to take the kids down first. Yeah, but I've got this tune coming out of my head. I just need to get this down. And then my wife says that I'm a time lord because everything is 5 minutes. I'll be there in 5 minutes. I'll do it in 5 minutes. She's like 4 hours bloody later. I was like, I just got lost in the music. I'm really sorry. And she's like, yeah, well, we got lost on the way to such and such. We've now come back. And you still, she's an amazingly patient and brilliant woman. But it's very much the main challenge of working on all the things is not the ability to do them. It's having the time to get your brain in that zone between it.
All right. Yeah, we're running out of time. But trust me.
Speaking of, I like the way you segued that. Speaking of time, we don't have any.
Yeah, the questions are boring. I mean, AI, not there. I'm better. At least this year, I guess. I don't know what's coming in the future. But this was great. Thank you so much, Paul. It's been so much fun talking to you, and I'm so proud to talk to one of my favorite composers, whom I look up to all the time. And thank you so much for your time. It was so educational and great talking to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Honestly, it's been an absolutely wonderful chat. The AI thing aside, because it's just bloody funny, and that's a really good poem. Damn it. So I was speaking to a poet yesterday about something, about a possible project, and we were saying exactly that. It was like, actually, yours isn't bad, but the AI one really nailed it. Absolute pleasure to speak to you, genuinely, and keep up the composing. All right.